Howdy guys, welcome back to BRG Photography. My name's Ben, and today we're going to be doing another from start to finish full portrait retouch using Affinity Photo. We're using this image right here, which I took a while back, and you may think to yourself, wow, this looks pretty good. Looks like it's done. Yeah, that's because it is done. This is the after, actually. This is the before. So if you want to see how I go from here to here, stay tuned. Alright guys, welcome back to our retouch video. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. Now if you've watched any of my other videos, you kind of know my order of operations. The first thing I like to do is a cleanup step, and that's where we're just going to get rid of all these little small things that we can get rid of really quick, usually using the in-painting brush tool or the clone stamp tool. So what I mean is like things like, you know, this little blemish here, these little hairs sticking out, or these little like kind of little nicks and things on the face. We're going to do that, and then we're going to go into our dodge and burn step. We're going to even out some of this unevenness in the skin. You can see there's some dark patches down here, some dark patches on the forehead. We're going to even all that out to get it nice and smooth looking. And then there's also some saturation inconsistencies in her face because she's wearing this orange kimono actually. We've got a lot of this like sunlight hitting it, and the orange is hitting her face. You can look at her face and you can see like this part of her face is quite saturated with color, where this top of her forehead's actually very undersaturated. So what we're going to try to do is even that all out so we can kind of get a more uniform saturation on her face. So that's the plan, and we're going to start. So first thing I want to do is create a brand new layer, an empty layer. We're going to call this cleanup. And this is where we're going to do all our really fast cleanups. And I like to use the in-painting brush tool because it's fast. Make sure you are set to current layer and below. And I just do 100% across the board. And it's just, I think the one in Affinity Photo is great. You can just come in here, you can see something you don't like, and you can just get rid of it. Same as these hairs from her hair back there. Just like so. Get rid of it. Now when I come across something that's here on the edge, usually I'll switch to my clone stamp tool, and again make sure we are at current layer and below, and then I might actually drop the hardness to like 50% and maybe do a lower flow of like 10%. That way I can kind of blend it in the area, blend in with the surrounding area a bit better. So I might just come here, sample from just around this area, and with my brush just kind of start painting across, and maybe I'll move where I am sampling from, and I think that's gonna make a lot. It's easier than doing it with the maybe I went a bit too fast. Fine, yeah, that looks good, right? And then if you have a low flow, it's easier to blend it in with the surrounding background. So that's why working with a low flow can be nice. So you can see there that I just got rid of that. Pretty simple stuff. Just go through really quick. Any other big things we want to get rid of? Actually, her skin's fantastic. This is a model I worked with, or I met about this year, I think. She's got all of her stuff on the social media. I'll go ahead and put that down at the bottom of the screen and in the description below, so you can please follow her. She's an awesome person, beautiful model from Spain. And we've worked together a few times. She's fantastic, really funny, talks a ton, so really interesting to talk to. And but she's got fantastic skin, so there's really not too much I have to do with her as far as any kind of cleanups. Like things like this, just get rid of her stray little hair from the eyebrows. Freckles and things, these are things that you can decide for yourself, or you can talk to this person. For example, this is a big mole freckle, and that's basically something that really identifies her, so I'm not going to erase that. But little things like this, you know, maybe this little one on the forehead, like I think they act as more of a distraction to the final image, so I don't mind getting rid of these little small ones. Maybe some of these little like hairs here. And also sometimes I like to get rid of these little reflections, these specular highlights that are formed by, I guess, like the foundation, whatever kind of foundation makeup she's wearing. You know, sometimes women have that kind of foundation that kind of makes the skin look a bit sparkly, which looks really cool, but sometimes it might be a bit distracting. So from far away, it kind of looks like maybe it could be sweat, or it just looks like a white dot on her face. So a lot of times I'll actually just come and try to get rid of not every one, but just some of the big ones that I feel are distracting to the image. Even for example here we have this really sharp highlight on her nose. That's fine, but I might actually come into my clone stamp, just sample a little bit above it and just knock it down a bit. You can see there I just kind of knocked it down, and it's going to kind of like make the skin look a little smoother. So I'm going to switch back to my inpainting brush and just really quick gonna go through a lot of details that you're not even gonna see when this is posted on social media, on Instagram or wherever. But I think it's always nice to work with the full-size image because it's easier. You have a lot more data to work with, and you know, you never know. These I actually just recently I had a model from a photo shoot I did 2 years ago, and she was like, "Hey, do you have the full-size retouched image of that photo shoot from 2 years ago, because I want to print it out on a yoga mat?" So I was like, "Oh, okay." So luckily I have all the stuff already done, so all I had to do is convert it to CMYK and change the resolution to fit onto a yoga mat, and now she can send it off and get her own personal like yoga mat, which is kind of an interesting thing to do. But hey man, to each their own. She loves the image. I'm happy she loves it, and she's happy to have it printed on a yoga mat. So if I hadn't have done that, I had to go back and spend another hour to retouch the large size image. So that's why it's always good to just work with the large image, work with the full size image. You have lots of detail, and you never know where this image will be seen years down the road. All right, so I think this is okay. We've got a little bit of like hairs, just natural like facial hairs here on the back of the jaw. Let's just, using our clone stamp, let's see if we can just kind of get rid of it. It's barely even noticeable. We're just going to do that. All right, that looks okay. Maybe I'll get rid of this little, was my in painting, that little bit there. This laugh line, I don't want to get rid of it, because if I get rid of it, it looks kind of unnatural, I think. What you can do is you can drop your opacity down to like, let's say 20%, and then go over it. And that way what it does is it just kind of lightens it without completely getting rid of it. So I actually do that sometimes, where I might come and say, I don't want to completely remove this detail, but I do want to make it lighter. And the good thing is when you work at a low opacity, you can just kind of keep going over it and over again until it gets down to the level that you'd like. So for example, this line here, I'm going to go over it maybe 3 times, and you can see that it just kind of lightened it, but it's still there, so it still looks natural. This white part under the eye, yeah, I can kind of go over this a few times to see if we can just lighten it to where I like it, like that. And maybe same thing here. So yeah, you don't always have to work at 100% opacity, but it's easy when you're doing quick. So okay, that's okay. Everything's okay here. There's like a string here on the fabric. We're gonna get rid of that. Same thing with these veins here, like, you know, because of the way her wrist is pointed, her veins are really showing through, and it's not bad, but it might be a bit distracting, just depending on how you feel about that. So again, I'm going to drop the opacity down to like 20% or something, and then just go over it once, maybe just go over them, and then I'll see if I like that. Maybe I want to go over it again and just lighten it down, because I feel like if it was completely gone, I guess you would never even know it was there. But for me, I like to try to edit my images and keep them as realistic looking as possible. Like, I've actually had people say like, "Oh, this looks great. Did you even retouch it at all?" I'm like, yeah, trust me, you don't want to see the before. You'll be surprised about stuff that I retouched. But the fact that someone looks at an image and doesn't think it's retouched, like, that's good. I think I've done my job well if my image does not look retouched. I think we've all definitely seen images on Instagram where you can just tell like this image has been so heavily photoshopped it looks ridiculous. So I don't want to do that. I want to stay away from that as much as I can. So I like to keep my stuff looking pretty realistic. All right, so down here on the leg, you know, there's a few little hairs and stuff here we want to get rid of. So I guess to any models possibly watching, you know, don't forget that after a shoot, you got someone like me or who are our viewers who are watching, who are going to be down here looking at your image at the pixel level, and finding every little embarrassing missed spot that you forgot to shave when you or a spot you missed, or little things like that. And because we've got the sun coming behind her and hitting her directly in the skin, anybody's gonna have every little hair just be instantly like reflected really bright in the sunlight. So I'm gonna get rid of that. Switching to my clone stamp tool, we're gonna do like maybe a 10 or 12%, and just like we did before with the chin, just kind of come in here and just do this. Now you could say, well, why don't you use the in-painting brush tool? And you can, but I've noticed that sometimes you try to come in here with that, sometimes it does a really good job, and sometimes it might kind of like create little like parts of the skin, or it kind of doesn't do it as evenly as I would like. So I think it's just easier if I do with I have more direct control over what is being replaced, and especially I can get right up to the edge. Something like here, it's a bit darker, so I have to make sure that I'm kind of sampling from an appropriate area so it looks okay. And in the end, this is going to be so small, like even the little bit of inconsistencies with the clone stamping is not even going to be noticeable. But I just want to get rid of these main ones just because they're really dark. So you got to make sure, you notice like this line is coming up this way, so I want to make sure I'm sampling along that line. I don't want to sample from over here and do that because it's not going to match. Where if you sample from along the line, you can imagine that, and then actually because it's down there, it's pretty easy to kind of get everything else to match pretty well. So yeah, always be careful of where you're sampling from. Take your time, like I actually do quite enjoy this process. So I just put on some music, put on some headphones, and just take my time to enjoy this, because if you try to rush through it, you're going to end up having to like spend more time correcting your mistakes. So I just say, take your time, do it right the first time, and be happy. And like I know that when this is going to be put up on Instagram, actually it already is on Instagram, you don't even see any of this, but it's just kind of for my peace of mind, I guess. I know that it's done. I know that I cleaned it up as best as I could. Okay, so let's just do a little quick few other things here. I can just get rid of some of these like freckles and spots on the leg. I'm not going to spend too much time because I think we are actually pretty much done with this initial cleanup. Everything looks okay. So we've got another mole here, which is pretty high up on her leg, it looks like, and we want to decide, do we want to keep it, do we want to not keep it? It's okay, but I think like for me, because we have another mole here and we have one here, is both of these are kind of distracting, so I want to get rid of one of them. And I think if I just get rid of the one here on her leg, it's fine, because it's so high up on her thigh, no one's gonna ever see it. So if it's there, not there, no one's gonna care. It doesn't define her face, unlike the one that is on her face, which I think that if you got rid of that, then you would notice that it's gone, because that's kind of part of her character. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep that. Alrighty. Cool. Alright, that looks good. So if we actually turn that off and on, you actually, at this level, you almost don't see anything. We can zoom into the face a little bit, and you will see a little bit of things we did there, because her skin's already super fantastic. And we actually did most of the work down here on the leg, and the wrist, and the arm, and before and after. I think that looks really good. So let's move on to something new. Let's actually move on to fixing some of these saturation issues. So like I said before, we can see, if we look at the face, there's all kinds of saturation happening. Like this part of her face is quite saturated, mainly because of the makeup, but also because a lot of this orange color is bouncing onto her face and saturating it. The top of her forehead is not very saturated, and this is very saturated. So we're going to try our best to even it out before we start moving into our dodge and burn to kind of fix some of these darker patches. So there's a lot of ways you can do this. Let's try one or two and see how it works. So let's actually just open up a hue, saturation, luminosity adjustment layer, and let's bump up the saturation in the reds like so. Then let's invert that and then using a white paintbrush with a really low flow of, we'll say, let's just do 2%. I have a 2% brush saved over here, 2%. And let's just kind of start painting in the parts where we want the color to be a bit more saturated. And it's probably really difficult to see right now. It's quite subtle. So this is one way you can do it. And if I turn it off and on, you can kind of see, like if you look at the forehead and that chin, you can kind of see where we've actually added in some color. All right, like that. So this is one easy way to do this. And if you feel like, okay, it's a little bit too much, so again, we're working with masks built into adjustment layers, so you can switch to your black color on your paintbrush and maybe say, okay, maybe that's a bit too much color there, and go back to your white and maybe add some color here, maybe add some color like that. So this is one way you can do it, and this way you have a lot of control over like how much color you put in a particular area. So that is one way to do that. And I think it actually looks pretty good, right? If we look at it, you can see we've just added a little bit of color and saturation into her forehead. So I think that's going to be pretty good. I'll show you one more. I'm going to turn that off. I'll show you another way. And that's just going to highlight the background layer. We are going to pick our lasso tool here, and let's grab some areas that we kind of feel are like undersaturated. So let's just maybe do this. Maybe we could just, for now, we'll just do that. Okay. Then what you can do is I think you can hit Q on the keyboard to do a quick mask, and you can see a quick mask. And then with our quick mask selected, we can go to filters, blur. We'll do a Gaussian blur. I always forget how to pronounce that. And we'll just kind of blur the edges a bit, like so. We'll hit apply. Okay. And then you can hit Q to get out of our quick mask, and so that mask has been made. And because we have that mask selected, now if we create a adjustment layer with that selection, it is going to, if we look at it, it's going to automatically create this mask. And so now that we have that mask created, and I guess if you want, you can also deselect. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect my selection. And now any adjustments I make to my hue saturation is just going to affect that. Now, as you can see, when I do this, it's not affecting, so I should probably put this over the cleanup pixels there. So there, kind of just like we did before, we can start raising the saturation a bit until we look like it looks pretty even with the surrounding area. And we can say like that. So that's off and that's on. And so you would just do the same thing with the forehead. You could actually kind of do it all in one layer, but this way you're controlling everything at the same intensity. So for certain images, that may be totally fine and it works. And I think it actually works for this one too. And again, if I wanted, I could come back and select my background layer again, hit my lasso tool, and maybe come and say, okay, well, let's just grab all the rest of this where it's a little less saturated like that. I think if you want to, I think you can hold down Control. I'm on a Mac, so sorry if you're on a PC, I can't really help you. You can hold down Control and it's gonna add to your selection, and maybe just grab some of that area. I think that's okay. And do the same thing. Q for quick mask. Let's Gaussian blur. Let's repeat the Gaussian blur. So that's repeated. Q to get out of our quick mask. We're gonna add another hue saturation layer. We're gonna put that above the cleanup. And again, we can go ahead and deselect, and we can just bump up the saturation on that part of the skin. And the Gaussian blur helps to kind of blend it in nicely. And so there you go. And if it's a bit too pink or a bit too red, you can actually come in here and maybe tweak the hue a little bit. Like that's going to make it obviously purple. That's going to make it more to the yellow. So that actually probably looks pretty good. Drop it down to like maybe -2 and maybe something like that, and turn it off and on. So yeah, you can actually, now the skin for those two things looks quite even. Cool. But I'm going to go ahead and delete that because we're going to keep the other way, where I think this way I had a bit more control. I could blend in the areas a bit better. So this is where I just painted in manually. And if I look at the layer, you can kind of see this is where I kind of painted it in. So I painted in a lot here, less here. I could come in here with my brush, my white paintbrush, and just kind of like try to like maybe fill in those areas if I want to with my 1% flow here. Maybe kind of help just to kind of like blend it in a bit better, like so. And select somewhere else. Okay, we're gonna just call that sat fix. Nice. So yeah, that looks okay. And same thing, if I wanted to, if I felt it was a little too pink, maybe I'll drop the hue down to bring it down just like -2 or -1, just to kind of get rid of the pink there. And again, if I want to do the opposite, here I can do the same thing. I can create a hue adjustments layer, and I can actually drop the saturation. Let's drop it to about there, invert that, and then with my soft paintbrush kind of lower the saturation on her cheeks. Just that's kind of getting rid of that like oranginess that's like been created from the reflection on her on the kimono. And maybe this I can actually come down here and just like lower the saturation just a little bit on this area. And it's quite subtle. And maybe I can come in here once I've kind of got that mask painted in, really subtle. I can try to adjust it a little more. And maybe something like that. And if we select both of these, and we turn them off and on, I think it's going to be really hard to see on YouTube, but if you do look especially at her forehead, nose, and the top of her cheek below the eye, we've kind of evened out the saturation across the board. So we can call this desat for desaturation, and maybe just drop the color down a bit. Perfect. Cool. All right, so let's just group these together. We'll call this the sat fix because I don't want to spell out saturation. And I think that's just kind of evened out the saturation in her skin a lot better. And cool, we are good to go with that. Alrighty, so next let's move on to our, this will be the last step for this video. Let's move on to our dodging and burning. So what I do, I actually have a macro set up for this. I'm going to go ahead and go to my library. I'm going to hit contouring, dodge and burn with helpers. Click on that. Actually, let's do it here. Yes, click on that. If it will click, sometimes Affinity doesn't like to do my macros. Okay. And it's created 4 things here. First, it's created a dodge curves adjustment layer. It's a bit too hot. I'm going to turn that down. It's created a burn adjustment layer, which is my burn level. And it has created a black and white layer, which this is basically just a black fill layer switched to the color mode. And then we have another curves adjustment layer, which is a really strong S curve. And this is to help us really see the light and dark in the face. So for example here, by creating this really strong S curve, you can really see like the differences in dark and light on her skin. Without it, you can see it, but when you see here now, you can see, okay, wow, this area is really dark. There's some dark on her cheek. There's some dark patches on her forehead. And that's going to really help us to be able to dodge and burn it out a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and take my burn and dodge layer, group these together. We'll just call it DB. And we are going to paint with a white paintbrush at, we'll say 1% flow on our dodge layer. So what are we doing again? What we're doing is we are going to use the curves adjustment layer that has been inverted, and we're going to paint white onto that layer to bring out some of these dark spots. So for example, if I do it with a 100% opacity brush and I paint, you can see because Affinity has built-in masks for its adjustment layers, when you paint with white, it's going to reveal the effect underneath. And the effect is this brighten, this curves adjustment to make it bright. And so by painting with a white mask, we can reveal the brightness that we did underneath. You can actually see if I bump this up, it gets really bright. If I bring it down here, it's going to get dark. So that's what we're doing. So we're using that to control how bright we want things to be. But if we do it with 100%, we have zero control over it. So I'm going to go ahead and undo all this. But if we do it with a low flow brush, then you actually have a lot more precise control, and you can slowly build up areas that are dark to build them up to kind of get it looking a lot more natural. So as I was talking, I was actually doing this, and you may not even really notice that I did anything, but if I turn this off and on, there you can see it's quite a difference. And if we turn our helpers off, then you can see it's quite subtle, but it just helps to even out the skin. So let's turn our helpers, but let's actually group our helpers together. So this and this, we're going to group these together. We'll call that helpers. That way we can turn them on and off really easily. And you can see what I did here. So I think for this image, I'm going to work at a little bit wider field of view, as opposed to like coming down here and trying to like, you can come down here and try to like, you know, lighten every little patch. But I think for this image, it might be easier just to kind of back away a bit, look at the whole grand scheme of the image, and then just come and with broad strokes, come here and try to like just even out some of this darkness, dark patches in the skin, just to kind of really get the skin looking even and beautiful and fantastic and other adjectives. All right, so let's see, maybe around here again, maybe sometimes you do a big brush. Sometimes if you get the small brush, you kind of get little like streaks of like light and dark. So sometimes it's actually okay to work with a bigger brush and just do big strokes to kind of like even this stuff out, like so. Maybe right here on the chin, there's some dark spots here, and yeah, this is actually, her skin's really fantastic, as I said before, so it's not gonna take too long. There's really not too much to do. It's more about just looking like, what do I want to lighten up? You do have to, this does take practice, because you got to kind of judge like what to lighten and what not to lighten, because, you know, if I lighten every shadow, then all of a sudden her face has no depth and it's just become flat. But so what I'm really looking for is not trying to lighten up every shadow, is I'm just trying to like lighten up like dark patches of skin and inconsistencies in like luminosity. Even like this is really dark, and so I could just maybe just come here and lighten up the whole thing, just because why not? I think it'll look good. And maybe around here there's some kind of like, usually there's a little bit of darkness around the edge of the mouth, or the corners of the mouth. Maybe that shadow here, there's some like kind of dark patches here. We can just lighten that up in a small little brush to do that, and maybe a bigger brush to come in here. Maybe this is a really dark shadow on her nose. We can just kind of lighten up that shadow. Maybe here under the eye. I think that's okay. I want the cheek to be okay, like dark, like the I guess the makeup. And let's see, I think this is going to be okay for this. Just see if we can fix that. And let's take a look at what we've done so far. Actually, going to be quite a different. It's going to be quite a thing. Look at that, huge difference. And again, don't forget, where you might still see, oh, there's so much little patchiness here that are like white patches and dark patches. But again, remember, we're looking at this really extreme S curve. If we turn off our helpers, all of that kind of goes away, and now her skin looks fantastic. I'm not gonna lie. All right, that looks really good. But most importantly is I think it looks really natural. It still looks very natural. It's very true to her. We're not trying to fool anybody just because we, just even out the skin texture a little bit. So I think that looks fantastic. Let's go ahead and turn our helpers back on. Is there anything else we want to fix? Maybe down here in the leg, you can see it's just like a little bit, oops, I painted on the wrong thing. Dodge here. It's just a little bit, dark. And maybe just here we can lighten up this area. I think I'm going to come here and lighten up the hand, because the hand is so much darker than the leg that it's touching. I just want to come here, and if it's a bit too much, let's fix this S curve. We're kind of losing some. Let's fix it. Let's not make it so extreme. Let's make it so it's easy for us to see what we're doing. Like around here, the knuckle, this thing here, it's kind of dark. It's a bit distracting. This patch, I keep painting on the wrong level. Layer patch here. Like that. We can kind of let's do this. Do here. Just kind of lighten up the hand in general. There's some dark parts down here we can fix. Maybe just here on her wrist, on her hand. There's some like dark patches. That's okay, and everything looks okay here. The shirt, maybe there's like a little bit. It's a little dark just right there. We're just gonna see if we can just kind of like bring it down a bit. Okay. Yeah, that looks good. And now let's move on to burn. Usually there's not too much that I need to burn. There's very few things where I need to make something darker. What I could do is, for example, darken up this part on the lips just to kind of get it to look, to match a little better with the her lipstick, or maybe it wasn't kind of applied all the way. I can see like a little like white kind of streak coming down the shirt here. Just gonna see if we can just do this, like just really like that. Subtle, but makes a big difference. And I don't know, like maybe I think the chin's okay. I can come and see this little part needs to just be a little bit lighter. Maybe just under the eye here a little more, maybe that patch. And yeah, I think, to be honest, I don't really see too much that needs to be darkened. I think this looks great. So let's go turn off our helpers, and oops, we can off and on. We can see what we've done. This is our before, and this is our after dodge and burn. And you can especially look at the leg. Like the leg just really got evened out really nice. Same as the wrist and the arm, and then her face just got really clean looking, really nice looking. I think that looks really fantastic. One thing I forgot to do here is just actually clean up this makeup now that I see it. So I'm going to come back down here to my cleanup, and just using a stamp brush, my clone stamp tool, going to sample from somewhere about here and just paint in. Now we do have a burn layer. We do have a burn layer above this. So I may have to go back and reduce some of that burn, because now that I've painted over it, that burn layer is really affecting this here. So let's probably come to our burn layer. Let's switch to a paintbrush. Let's to a black paintbrush that's going to erase things, and maybe I can just come and kind of erase that so it's not so dark. Okay, and let's do maybe just a little more here, and maybe just get it. Let's see if we can get it to the edge so it just looks a bit more natural. All right, I think that looks okay. Yeah, a lot of times, like, lipstick and stuff, you can always do quick little fixes just like that. And if I want to add in some texture, I can maybe come in here and try to, like, do a little bit of that. This is the good thing about using a low flow, is you can kind of blend it in as much as you like. Oops. Cool. Well, but we're going to do that. All right. So let's look at what we've done so far. I'm going to go ahead and delete the helpers layer. We don't need that anymore. We've got our dodge and burn. We got our saturation fix and our cleanup. I'm going to select those groups, and I'm going to turn them off and turn them on. And I think that already looks pretty good, really good. If I want to, for example, I want to maybe make this a little lighter. I'm going to go to my dodge layer. I'm going to look at the actual mask here. I'm going to hold down Option and click on dodge, and I can see I can still go a little bit brighter. So I'm going to switch to my paintbrush, white paintbrush, and just paint it on the wrong layer on my dodge, and then just kind of see if I can get that a little lighter. There you go. That looks good. And maybe same thing with this dark line here, and maybe some of this here. And you know, sometimes it's actually good to look at it in color, because sometimes when you do see the color, you might see areas that you may have missed, or now the color brings out things that you actually want to be a little lighter or darker. So it's okay to look at things in color again and say, okay, all right. So I think for this first step, this first video, we're pretty much done with this image. The next video, actually, you know, I see something else. There's a little dark, I guess not only a stain or something right here. Just gonna see if I can just lighten that up. There we go. Okay, now we're done. All right, so for this video, this first video, we're pretty much done here. And in the next video, what we're going to do is we are going to do our contour, dodging, and burning, and we are going to do the hair and the background to get this image looking like that. So stay tuned for our next video, and guys, if you watched to the end, thank you very much for watching. I love your comments. I get a few comments on my videos. I'm really happy to hear them. So if you like what I'm doing, leave a comment. If you've got a better technique or a more interesting technique, please share with me. I'm always happy to learn new techniques and ways of doing things. And please subscribe and all that good stuff, and I will see you next time. All right, guys, thanks a lot.